Dear curious listener, welcome. You've just time-traveled to Victorian Britain. Not the candlelit ballroom version with polite suitors and teacups, I'm afraid. No, this is the real thing. It's early morning. You're freezing. The water jug beside your bed? Solid ice. There's no thermostat, no hot shower. Just the sound of someone coughing in the dark. You're sharing this cramped room with 5 other people. One of them snores. Another has lice. You might too. This was everyday life for most Victorians. Not grand or elegant, just cold, crowded, and barely manageable. But don't worry, you're safe here. You can just lie back, relax, and let history do its worst while you drift gently into sleep. If you enjoy these nightly time slips into misery, be sure to subscribe and tell me what country you're listening from. Because tonight, we're entering a world where the streets weren't paved with gold, just coal dust and dysentery. You wake up to the sound of someone coughing. Not just a light, polite cough either. This one's chesty, persistent. It's the kind of cough that makes you wonder whether your brother has a cold or consumption. You roll over, slowly, because sudden movement means cold air under the covers, and immediately bump into someone else's elbow. You're not alone. You never are. This is a one-room home. Maybe 2 rooms if you're one of the lucky ones. But your family's large, and the floor space is not. You share this room with your parents, your siblings, maybe a grandparent. And by share, we don't mean everyone has their own cozy bed. No. You've got one straw mattress, a few musty wool blankets, and a lot of limbs overlapping each other. You lie there for a moment, staring at the ceiling. It's dark. Always is this early. The fire's long since gone out, and your breath clouds in front of your face. You pull the blanket tighter around your shoulders, but it's already claimed by your younger sister, who somehow cocooned herself in half of it. You consider starting a small pre-dawn tug of war. Then you remember, it's not worth it. Not when you'll be getting up in a moment anyway. And so, with a resigned grunt, you sit up, slowly. Because sitting up too fast means your bare skin will brush against the cold air, and that's not something anyone needs before sunrise. The mattress crunches beneath you. It's filled with straw, flattened and sour from weeks of shared use. There's a faint smell of sweat, coal smoke, and possibly boiled cabbage lingering in the air. That, or someone's feet. You reach for your clothes. They're not in a drawer. They're under the mattress, being kept warm by your body heat overnight. Not that they're warm. They're just slightly less frozen than they would be on the chair. You slip them on quickly. A wool shirt with a stretched neckline, trousers that were patched twice last winter and never quite fit right again, and socks so thin you may as well go barefoot. The sleeves smell like smoke. The collar smells like old stew. But they're dry. And in Victorian Britain, dry is a luxury. In the corner of the room, the youngest is still asleep. Someone's snoring. Your mother is already up. Has been for a while, most likely. You can hear her downstairs, rattling the stove, muttering about how the coal's too damp to catch properly. She's been trying to start that fire since before the first cough. Your father's boots are by the door. They're caked in last night's mud and stacked neatly, soles facing upward to keep the rats out. You bend to tie your laces. Well, lace. One broke last week, so you've got twine on the other side. You double knot it. You don't have time to trip today. There's a sharp whistle in the distance, the factory bell, if you're in the city. Or perhaps the clatter of hooves if you're in the countryside. You might even hear roosters crowing if your roof doesn't leak too badly and your window hasn't frozen shut. Either way, it's time. You shuffle across the room, careful not to step on the little ones still curled up in the corner. The floor is bare and icy under your feet. A draft creeps under the door and kisses your ankles. You pause by the water jug. You should have brought it in last night, but you didn't. And now there's a delicate film of ice stretched across the top. You tap it with your knuckle. It doesn't budge. You pick up the spoon and give it a solid whack. It cracks. You win. Sort of. You'll need this water to wash your face. You sigh. That's a problem for future you. For now, you tilt the jug, hearing the icy slosh of winter mornings, and set it down on the washstand. You've done this before. Many times. Someone sneezes. Someone farts. Someone groans about it being too early, even though it's the same time every morning. You move back to the center of the room and begin layering. Scarf, cap, coat. Anything to trap a bit of warmth before you step outside into the real cold. The kind of cold that stings your nose and makes your fingers go numb before you even reach the door. But at least you're up. That's something. In Victorian Britain, waking up at all is a minor triumph. And now comes the next challenge. Washing. With water. Icy water. No plumbing. No privacy. Let's face it. You're going to hate this. But we're doing it anyway. Ready? Let's get to it. You stand in front of the washstand, staring down at your enemy. A cracked ceramic bowl and a dented metal jug of water that's still judging you from its icy core. You try to remember if you're awake or still dreaming. The cold assures you. You're very much awake. This is your version of a bathroom. No tub, no plumbing, no sink, no steamy mirrors to wipe with your sleeve. Just this rickety washstand tucked in the corner of the room, next to your younger brother's pile of socks, which may or may not qualify as biological hazards. There's a flannel beside the bowl. It's stiff, possibly frozen. You give it a little shake, and it flops like something halfway between cloth and cardboard. Still damp from yesterday, or the day before, or, let's be honest, who knows when. You don't bathe. You don't have time for that. And even if you did, the only actual bathtub is at the public wash house, which costs money and dignity. Instead, you perform the ancient Victorian ritual known as the stand-up wash. The trick is to strip only what's necessary, never all at once. That would be suicide. You'd freeze solid like the chamber pot water someone forgot to empty last night. So you start slow. One sleeve comes off, just the one. The other arm stays wrapped in as much wool as you can manage. You tip the jug and pour a bit of water into the bowl. It sloshes reluctantly, like it too is tired of existing at this temperature. You wet the flannel and squeeze it out. It lets out a defeated sigh. A dab of soap now, though soap is a generous term. It's more like a waxy brick that smells faintly of lye and disappointment. You rub it onto the flannel and immediately regret it. It burns. Not metaphorically, literally, but pain means cleanliness, right? Or at least it means you're not dead yet. You scrub your exposed arm, quickly. The cold is already biting. Then rinse, switch arms, repeat. The skin turns pink from friction and frost. But you keep going. You have to. Because as miserable as this is, you'd rather do it than be the kid with the visible necktie line. That little smudge of grime beneath the jaw that says, "This child washed their face and gave up on the rest." You've seen it. You've been it. And your mother noticed. She always notices. Now it's the face. Always the face next. You dip the flannel back in and use the cleanest water left, which, at this point, is a questionable distinction. You dab around your eyes. You rinse your ears. You try to ignore the fact that the water smells faintly of coal dust and something metallic. You pause. Take a deep breath. Yes, the worst part is coming. The neck. You steel yourself. Scrub hard. Too hard. It stings. That's how you know it's working. A Victorian wash isn't about comfort. It's about visible results. You want to look like you tried, even if your nose is dripping and your fingertips have turned a gentle shade of blue. If you're truly committed, or if someone's inspecting later, you might even go for the underarms. That requires bravery and quick hands. You tuck the flannel in, give it a few angry swipes, and pray no one walks past the door just then. Below the waist? Well, let's just say some bits are washed as and when they become available, to quote a certain wise witch from the Discworld. Once you've hit all the essentials, or as many as you can handle in freezing conditions, you rinse the flannel. The bowl water is now a murky gray, flecked with soot, soap, and shame. You tip it into the chamber pot, or, if you're feeling rebellious, out the window. You're done. For now. You dry yourself with a towel the size and texture of a modern tea cloth. It's not plush. It's not warm. But it soaks up just enough water to prevent you from turning into a human icicle. That's all you can ask. And the flannel? It goes back on the edge of the washstand, ready to stiffen into something that resembles a medieval weapon by morning. Everyone in the house uses the same setup. Some even share water. That's just how it works. You don't get hot baths with lavender oils and scented candles. You get cracked hands, red elbows, and a constant itch you're trying not to think about. And laundry? Let's not even get into that yet. You'll smell like smoke and coal before breakfast anyway, so why suffer now? You step back from the basin. You're freezing. You're damp. But you're clean, in the loosest possible sense of the word. And with that, you're ready to face the rest of your Victorian day. Congratulations. You've washed up without losing a toe to frostbite. Well done, you. Let's take a moment to talk about clothes. Not the glossy costume drama kind with lace-trimmed gowns and top hats that always sit at the perfect angle. No. We're going to look at what people actually wore in Victorian Britain and why it mattered more than you'd think. Rich or poor, urban or rural, one truth tied the whole era together. Layers. Lots and lots of layers. For the wealthy, this layering was elegant and exhausting. A respectable society lady might start her day in a chemise, a kind of Victorian slip that touched the skin. Over that came petticoats, then corsets, then a corset cover, then bodices, then skirt upon skirt upon skirt. Then, just for good measure, a shawl, gloves, and something called a modesty piece, in case the suggestion of a collarbone caused a scandal. Removing it all required time, space, and at least one servant, sometimes more. Victorians were not efficient dressers. They were ceremonial. If a wealthy woman managed to get completely dressed in under an hour, someone would probably accuse her of being French. But the poor, now the poor had their own approach to layering. Less about style, more about survival. Step into any back alley of a northern industrial town, or peek inside a thatched cottage in the countryside, and you'd find a very different type of wardrobe. Picture a young boy in threadbare trousers held up with twine, a jacket that once belonged to his father, and probably his grandfather, and socks made from whatever was left of last winter's blanket. The outfit might be 3 sizes too big or 2 sizes too small, or both, depending on which limb you're looking at. But it had to be worn, because the air was cold, The floors were colder, and frostbite wasn't interested in your fashion sense. Mothers patched until fabric gave up entirely. Sleeves were tied on with string when buttons disappeared. Waistbands were pinned or improvised. Shoes? Optional. Or at least they were if yours had fallen apart, and many did. A pair of boots might be shared between siblings. You wore them when it was your turn to go out, and when it wasn't your turn, well, that's what calluses were for. Some of our best evidence for working-class fashion comes not from paintings or formal portraits, but from mugshots. When someone was arrested for petty theft, vagrancy, or some other act of desperation, they were photographed just as they were. No borrowed finery, no staged studio lights, just layers of misfitting, reworked clothing, ragged cuffs, frayed hems, the occasional attempt at a collar that suggested they'd once tried to look decent. And that word, decent, it mattered more than you'd expect. Because in Victorian society, clothing wasn't just protection from the cold. It was proof that you were civilized. Clean cuffs and straight seams told the world you were respectable. Even if you hadn't eaten in 2 days, even if your home was a single damp room above a tannery, if you looked tidy, people believed you had self-control. To look unkempt was to invite judgment. It meant you were careless, or worse, immoral. Employers didn't want a sloppy maid. Landladies didn't want disheveled lodgers. And heaven forbid you walk past a church on Sunday looking like you'd slept in a sack. Which, to be fair, you probably had. For many women, especially those seeking domestic work, appearance was everything. A young girl hoping to be hired as a scullery maid might scrub her hands raw the night before an interview, just to look clean enough. Her dress might be borrowed, her shoes stuffed with rags to fit. But as long as she looked like she cared, she had a chance. Men faced their own trials. A worn waistcoat might be stitched within an inch of its life just to suggest employment. A decent hat, though faded, was better than none at all. Hats, after all, were social armor. No hat, no manners, no job. The irony? Most of these clothes weren't meant to last this long. Factory-made garments were becoming more common by mid-century. But the poor still lived in hand-me-downs, second-hand market finds, and garments that had been altered so many times they barely resembled their original form. But they wore them, layered them, reinforced them. Because going outside without enough clothing wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. Cold wasn't just a nuisance in Victorian Britain. It was a killer. And so, people dressed the best they could, wrapped themselves in dignity, pinned their pride beneath 4 layers of patched flannel. Because even if you were poor, especially if you were poor, you had to look like you were trying. And that, dear listener, was half the battle. Now that you're dressed, or at least wrapped in enough wool to survive a mild frostbite, it's time to feed yourself, or try. Because the Victorian breakfast, well, let's just say no one was writing poems about it. Breakfast, the most important meal of the day, if you lived in a cookbook. But you don't. You live in Victorian Britain. And here, breakfast is less about nourishment and more about keeping your stomach from making desperate, awkward noises until lunch. You sit down at the table. Actually, table is a generous term. It's more of a rickety plank balanced on 2 mismatched chairs. There's no spread, no gleaming silverware, no dainty plates of eggs or crisped bacon. You're not in a Bronte novel. You're in a freezing back kitchen with condensation on the windows and soot in your eyebrows. Before you, in all its underwhelming glory, sits a single loaf of bread. It's hard. It's dry. It's slightly stale, but it's what you've got. If you're lucky, you'll get a full slice. If you're really lucky, there'll be a dab of margarine, or better yet, jam. Strawberry, if someone's feeling extravagant. Most likely, it's a jam so runny it counts more as a fruit suggestion. You chew slowly. Bread takes time, not because it's delicious, because it's dense. Your jaw does half the work of digestion before it even reaches your stomach. You wash it down with tea, not a cozy sweetened tea with milk and sugar. No, this is brick-colored and bitter, boiled half to death in the same pot that's used to cook potatoes, wash socks, and probably clean the floorboards. Still, it's warm. That counts for something. Now, if you happen to live in the north, things look slightly different. Instead of bread, your morning might begin with potatoes. Boiled, mashed, or reheated from yesterday's dinner. Potatoes are your region's answer to basically everything: hunger, poverty, winter, and in some cases, loneliness. By mid-century, potatoes have become a working-class staple in cities like Manchester and Liverpool. There's nutrition in them, vitamin C, believe it or not, and they're filling enough to get you through a 12-hour shift. Meanwhile, in the South, bread still reigns supreme. It's tradition, it's convenient, and it won't go off overnight. The real trick is not to eat too fast, because you won't be eating again for quite some time. If you're very, very lucky, someone might have made porridge. Oats were affordable, especially in Scotland or the Midlands. They stuck to your ribs, which is a poetic way of saying they sat in your stomach like damp cement and kept you from collapsing before noon. A splash of milk might appear if there's a cow in shouting distance or a friendly milkman who hasn't watered down the delivery again. Eggs, rare. Cheese, special occasion. Bacon, a fantasy reserved for payday, holidays, or hallucinations. Fresh vegetables? Let's not get silly. If you're poor, vegetables are a seasonal luxury, not a dietary staple. Carrots, onions, greens, those belong to the wealthy, the gardeners, or the select few who've managed to get an allotment. And even then, good luck keeping them from freezing before they reach your plate. Fruit? Only if it falls off a cart and no one notices. Vitamin C at this point is more rumor than reality. Scurvy, the sailor's disease, finds a nice second home inland among the working classes. Bleeding gums, loose teeth, fatigue. Just the usual. But let's not get dramatic. There's always bread. Back in the city, you finish your slice, carefully wiping the crumbs from your fingers into your lap. Every scrap matters. You might even save the crust to nibble later. Something to look forward to on your midday break, if you're allowed one. Your younger sibling is still gnawing on theirs, dragging it through the faint sheen of jam, like it's the most delicious thing they've ever tasted. Maybe it is. Sometimes, if you live in a crowded street, you'll see a chip vendor pass by in the evening. But not now. Not at breakfast. That's a luxury for later, and only if someone's managed to find an extra coin at the bottom of a drawer. Breakfast is over quickly. Efficient. Quiet. Maybe someone hums. Maybe someone coughs. Maybe the baby wails because there's no milk. Again, you stand, stomach full enough to move, not full enough to feel comfortable. That's good. Comfort breeds laziness, or so the Victorians said. You put on your coat, still smelling faintly of coal and last week's stew, and head for the door, because work waits, hunger waits, cold waits. And that slice of bread, that's got to last you a long, long way. So yes, breakfast of champions, Victorian style. You step outside into the chill morning air, breath fogging in front of you, boots, or whatever's left of them, already damp from the cobbled street. Your hands are shoved deep in your pockets, not for comfort, but to hide the fact that they're already going numb. You're not headed to school. You're headed to work. You're 9, maybe 10, or maybe you've been 9 for the last 3 years. No one checks birth certificates around here, and your boss isn't interested in your birthday. Just whether your hands can fit into small spaces or whether you can carry a bucket without dropping it. If you live in the city, you're probably going to the mill. Rows of red brick factories line the horizon, their chimneys already belching smoke into the cold gray sky. The windows are steamed, the machines inside loud enough to drown out your thoughts. You clock in, though not officially, of course, and find your spot on the spinning floor. Your job? Tie off loose threads, clear lint, crawl under the machines with a brush when they jam, and most importantly, don't lose a finger or an arm or your balance. There are no safety guards, no warning labels. If something catches, it doesn't stop. It pulls, it grinds, and if you scream, well, maybe someone hears you, maybe they don't. 12 hours later, you'll crawl back out, covered in dust, your ears ringing, your eyes raw from cotton fibers floating in the air like snow that hates you. But maybe you're not in a factory. Maybe you're down in the mine. You start before dawn, descending into the dark with a tiny lantern and a nervous stomach. Your job might be to open trap doors for airflow or haul carts of coal behind you like some undersized donkey. If you're big enough, you might even swing a pickaxe. The air is thick, wet, cold. The walls drip, every sound echoes. And above all, you know it's not safe. Cave-ins happen, explosions happen, and no one comes down here looking for missing children. Still, you're working. That's something. And if you're a girl, there's domestic service. That means waking up before your employer, before the sun, and before your own hunger. You clean out grates, polish boots, boil water for other people's baths. If you're lucky, they let you eat the crusts off their toast. If you're unlucky, you don't eat until supper, and by then, it's usually a spoonful of broth and a lecture about how loudly you breathe. You call the man of the house sir, his wife ma'am, and their children by titles they haven't earned. If the baby cries, it's your fault. If the silver isn't polished enough to blind someone, it's also your fault. And if your hands are raw from scrubbing, wear gloves. Don't have gloves? Improvise. Bleed discreetly. It's not all misery, of course. There are moments. The housemaid might sneak you a heel of bread. The other boys might let you ride the coal cart for a minute before the foreman comes. Sometimes, a kind mistress lets you borrow a shawl that isn't falling apart. Sometimes, the factory whistle blows early. But these are scraps, bits of kindness scattered between hours of labor. And don't get sick. Whatever you do, don't get sick. There's no sick pay, no time off, no doctor unless your employer's feeling charitable or guilty. If you collapse at your post, someone might carry you home. More likely, they'll drag you to the side and shout for the next kid to take your place. Because there's always another kid. Sundays are your best chance at a day off. You might go to church. Mandatory for some, especially if you're in service. You might get to sleep in. But more likely, you'll spend it doing the washing or mending clothes or helping your parents catch up on chores. And when Monday comes, back you go. Into the mill, the mine, the laundry, the kitchen, wherever you're useful. You are a child in Victorian Britain, but no one says it that way. They say you're useful, hard-working, small enough to get between the gears. And really, that's all that's required. So off you go, your hands chapped, your belly half full, your head already down. Another day, another shilling, if you're lucky. Imagine coming home after a 14-hour shift in the mill, or the mine, or someone else's mansion. You're exhausted. Soot in your eyebrows. Blisters in your boots, if you still have boots. Your back aches in places you didn't know had bones. And now, finally, you get to relax. Welcome home. It's a single room. Maybe two, if you're well off. The walls are thin. The ceiling leaks. The windows are cracked and permanently fogged from decades of breathing, sweating, coughing human life. There's no privacy, not even a curtain between beds, not even separate beds. The floor is wood, sort of, bare, always cold, and covered in whatever today is tracked in. Mud, ash, hair, coal dust, crumbs, maybe something alive. Probably something alive. And you're not alone in this humble little palace. Oh no, you live here with your entire family. Parents, siblings, maybe a grandparent or two, a cousin, the neighbor's child, temporarily. Sometimes people rotate in and out depending on work or illness or eviction. The walls do not stop sound. You hear every sneeze, every shuffle, every midnight stomach growl. You hear the neighbors argue, laugh, cry, cough. Especially cough. There is always coughing. The air smells of damp, and mildew, and yesterday's stew, and the chamber pot. Yes, that's in the room too, proudly tucked in the corner beneath a thin blanket of shame. When it's full, someone carries it out into the alley and empties it into the shared outdoor privy. Or what passes for one. That privy, by the way, it's a wooden seat over a pit, sometimes just a box. No water, no plumbing, no dignity. In many parts of London or Birmingham, you're sharing that one toilet with 20 to 30 people. And those are the good days. You hope it doesn't overflow. You hope no one's tipped it over. You hope no one's caught something new and left it waiting for you. Let's talk about the water situation. Fresh drinking water is a matter of hope, not guarantee. The pump in your alley might be contaminated. You don't know. You just know it's closer than walking to the river and it hasn't turned black yet. You boil it if you have fuel. If you don't, you say a small prayer and drink fast. Disease is your most persistent roommate. Cholera, typhoid, dysentery, tuberculosis. These are not exotic afflictions. These are neighborhood celebrities. Everyone knows someone with a fever. Everyone's been to a funeral. Everyone knows the feeling of waking up in the middle of the night, sweating, panicking, wondering, was that cough just a cough? The buildings themselves are a masterclass in disappointment. Slum landlords buy them cheap, stack in tenants like firewood, charge more than they're worth, and spend nothing on upkeep. If your ceiling leaks, too bad. If your stairway collapses, don't use it. If a rat moves in, name it and move on. In London, it's the overcrowded flats, long rows of brick buildings where each floor is divided and subdivided and then split again until privacy becomes a theoretical concept. In Birmingham, they have back-to-backs, homes built quite literally back-to-back, with only a single wall of windows and no ventilation. Great for noise, not great for tuberculosis. You might think, surely the authorities intervened? Eventually, in theory. But Victorian Britain had a curious approach to poverty. If people live in filth, it's because they deserve it. If they want better, they should simply work harder. Never mind that wages stayed low, rent stayed high, and clean housing was a luxury, not a right. So you made do. You cleaned when you could. You stuffed newspaper in the cracks. You prayed for dry weather. You hung wet laundry across your one small window and hoped the sun came out. You lived on top of one another, in every sense. And when someone died, because someone always died, you kept going, cleared the bed, replaced the straw, rearranged the sleeping order. There was no space to mourn. This is not a Dickensian exaggeration. This was daily life for millions of working-class Victorians. You didn't need to be unemployed to live in a slum. You just needed to be ordinary. Ordinary meant shared walls, shared beds, shared toilets. Ordinary meant children playing between coal carts and puddles of who knows what. Ordinary meant coming home with your lungs full of smoke and your hopes somewhere near your ankles. But still, you came home. You had a roof. You had walls. You had the warmth of other bodies, and maybe, if you were very lucky, a loaf of bread on the table. And in Victorian Britain, that was more than enough to call yourself fortunate. Sweet dreams indeed. Time to go shopping. Not the fun kind. Not the, ooh, I wonder if this corset comes in violet kind. This is Victorian Britain, remember? You're not browsing, you're battling. And you're armed with exactly 6 pence, an empty basket, and the faint, desperate hope that something edible hasn't been snapped up already. You're a woman, most likely, because shopping is women's work, which in this era translates to invisible, unappreciated, and impossibly hard. You step outside, wrap your shawl tighter, and join the slow-moving river of other women heading toward the market. Your shoes squelch against the cobbled street. It rained last night. Or maybe this morning. Or maybe it's just always wet here. The air smells of old fish, fresh manure, fried potatoes, and something deeply suspicious coming from a nearby alley. You take a deep breath anyway, because this is your battlefield, and you need to be alert. There is no supermarket. There is no one-stop shop. There is no trolley. You buy your food like you breathe, piecemeal, unglamorous, and with mild panic. Your first stop, the baker. Bread is life. Bread is routine. Bread is also suspiciously smaller than last week. You squint at the loaf. It looks the same. But is it heavier? Lighter? Was that last one made with proper flour or padded with ground-up chalk and sawdust? You don't know. And the baker's not telling. Still, you hand over your coin. You need bread. Your family needs bread. Next, the butcher, if you dare. Today there's a heap of kidneys on display, suspiciously shiny. A few grayish sausages that have clearly seen things. And if your timing is perfect and your pockets aren't empty, you might score a cut of actual meat. Not the nice bits, of course. That goes to the rich. You're looking for scraps, ends, maybe something with a bit of gristle that could pass as stew-worthy. But today, the queue is long. The best bits are gone. So you smile thinly, buy a bone for broth, and pretend it's what you came for. Then it's on to the milk seller. If there is one. He's got a cart and a jug and a cheerful grin that doesn't quite reach his eyes. He fills your tin cup from his larger jug, and you try not to notice the color. Milk in the 1800s has a gambling spirit. If it's white, it might be milk, or it might be water and chalk and hope. If it's sour, too bad. No refunds. You move on. Vegetables, or what's left of them. Carrots, maybe, or a turnip. Always a turnip. Turnips haunt your dreams. There are cabbages so wilted they fold themselves. Potatoes with eyes and ambitions. You pick through them carefully, trying to choose the least suspicious among the pile. A coin slips from your fingers. You grab it fast. Every farthing matters. You haggle. Not because it's fun, but because if you don't, you go home with half a dinner and no lunch tomorrow. You argue over a half pound of onions. You win. Barely. Then finally coal. You need something to cook with, something to heat the water, something to keep the room above hypothermic. You find the coal cart trundling down the street, wheels squealing, the boy dragging it barely taller than the shovel. You ask for a sack. He weighs it by eye, shortchanges you slightly, and moves on before you can protest. That's how it goes. He's just trying to feed his family too. You head home. Basket heavier now, though not exactly comforting. You didn't find meat. You didn't get the nice tea. You forgot soap. Again. But you have bread, a turnip, maybe a carrot. That's enough. Enough to make stew. Enough to make it through the day. There is no fridge, no freezer, no plastic wrap. Everything spoils. Quickly. If it doesn't spoil, something else might eat it first. Rats, cats, your brother. So you ration, you hoard, you hide food in cupboards and corners. You turn old bones into new meals. You stretch, simmer, and hope. And when someone gets sick, when someone can't work, when the baby needs milk and the money's gone, you pawn your shawl, or the good plate, or your boots. Because tomorrow, you'll be shopping again, haggling, guessing, scrimping, trying not to starve. Welcome to the Victorian grocery run. It's not elegant, it's not leisurely, but somehow you make it work. In Victorian Britain, love is optional. Marriage, on the other hand, is practically mandatory. Not because it's romantic, not because it's fulfilling, but because for most people, especially women, it's survival. If you're a woman, your life path resembles a narrow hallway with 3 doors. One says, marry. One says, serve. And one says, starve. Most girls are raised with a singular goal in mind: become someone's wife. Your education, such as it is, teaches you to hem, pour tea, and smile without revealing your actual opinion. Literature encourages you to faint attractively, and society makes it clear: a single woman without a husband is suspicious. So, courtship begins. If you're poor, this means catching the eye of a butcher's apprentice or a miner with all his teeth. If you're middle class, it means strategic walks in the park, supervised conversations, and letters passed through sisters. If you're wealthy, it's a full-blown military operation involving dowries, titles, and the careful negotiation of furniture. But regardless of class, one thing remains true. Courtship is less about compatibility and more about calculation. Your parents, your community, even your local clergyman, all have opinions about who you should marry, especially if the young man in question lacks income, or worse, ambition. And heaven help you if you fall for someone unsuitable. Most women marry young, in their teens, often. Because by 25, you're practically expired milk. And if you wait too long, the only men left are either ancient, bankrupt, or suspiciously enthusiastic about cousin marriage. Many young women marry older men, not for love, but for stability. A man with a steady wage, or any wage, is a valuable asset. That he's also a decade or two your senior? Irrelevant. Your job is to bear children and stir soup, not to critique his hairline. And once married, congratulations. You are now officially his. Legally, financially, socially. Under Victorian law, your husband owns everything you bring to the marriage, including your dowry, your body, and your right to say no. You become Mrs., not a person, a possession. Now, if you're a man, things look slightly better. On the surface, you get to choose your wife more or less, but your choice depends on your status, your class, your job, your hat. Everything you are signals what kind of woman you can afford. Marrying beneath you is frowned upon. Marrying above you is ambitious, dangerous, sometimes disastrous. A man without a job is not a bachelor. He's a problem. So you work, you save, you try to impress someone's father, while pretending not to notice the fact that your future wife isn't allowed to speak without her mother in the room. And once you're married, you become a provider. The pressure is yours. So is the final say. You are expected to lead the household. You may not be good at it. You may hate it. But too bad. That's your role. Feelings? Victorians don't do feelings. A husband's affection is appreciated, but not required. A wife's happiness is secondary to duty. Love may bloom, sure, but no one's counting on it. What matters is stability, respectability, appearances. Divorce? Let's not be ridiculous. To divorce in the Victorian era is to socially detonate. It's scandalous, difficult, and often impossible unless you're incredibly rich and incredibly male. A man might file if his wife is unfaithful. A woman, on the other hand, needs to prove adultery plus something worse, abuse, desertion, or incest. And even then, good luck convincing the courts. Illegitimacy is social death. Have a child outside of marriage? That child is branded illegitimate for life. They can't inherit property. They carry stigma. So does the mother, forever. It doesn't matter how it happened. Society assumes it was her fault. There is no mercy, only whispers. Gender roles in Victorian Britain are carved in stone and enforced with polite contempt. Women serve, men provide. Deviating from the script is dangerous, especially if you're poor. The wealthy might recover from scandal. You won't. So everyone plays the part. The bride smiles at her wedding. The husband stands tall. They walk into the future together, not always in love, but often in lockstep. Because what other choice is there? For better or worse, for richer or poorer, but mostly for survival. And no one asks how you feel about it. It's Sunday. The streets are quieter. The factories are silent. The pubs, well, the respectable ones, are shut. And across Victorian Britain, bells begin to chime. This is not a day of rest. Not really. It's a day of performance, a day of visible piety, and no matter how tired, cold, or hungry you are, you will go to church. Because in this society, faith is public currency. Religion touches everything: birth, death, marriage, morality, and even meal times. If you don't attend church, you're suspicious. If you don't quote scripture, you're suspect. If you smile too freely on a Sunday, someone will assume you're probably on the path to ruin. You dress in your best, which, for the poor, means the cleanest of the tattered. Your shoes are worn, your coat threadbare, but your hair is neat and your face scrubbed raw from Saturday's washing. Respectability is half hygiene, half illusion. You march to church with your family. No one speaks much. The walk is part ritual, part obligation. And once you arrive, you join the ranks of men, women, and fidgeting children lining the pews like they're preparing for judgment, which, in a sense, they are. The sermon begins. It's long, really long. The vicar or preacher stands above you, voice echoing off the stone walls, delivering words that are meant to uplift your soul, but mostly serve to terrify it into compliance. Hellfire is mentioned, a lot. So is eternal damnation. You're told that God is watching, always, even when you think He isn't, especially when you think He isn't. Your thoughts are not your own. Your sins, even the secret ones, are known. He sees you sneak the extra potato. He sees your envy of your neighbor's boots. He sees you yawn. You straighten up. The Sabbath is sacred and utterly exhausting. It's not just about belief. It's about image, piety must be seen. You bow your head during prayers, you avoid idle conversation, and you never, ever smile too broadly. Joy, after all, can be misinterpreted as frivolity, and frivolity is dangerously close to sin. If you're middle class, your moral conduct defines your worth. You're expected to keep a tidy home, a respectable table, and a God-fearing household. Domestic order is considered a reflection of spiritual virtue. Dust on the mantelpiece? Moral failing. Unruly children? Parental sin. If you're poor, it's more complicated. You're already on shaky moral ground. The Victorians were deeply fond of dividing the poor into two categories, the deserving and the undeserving. The deserving poor are humble, quiet, grateful, and visibly ashamed of their poverty. They go to church, bow their heads, and never complain. These are the people who might receive a loaf of bread or a second-hand coat from a local charity. The undeserving poor, they drink, they laugh, they skip sermons, they express opinions. These are the people the middle classes clutch their pearls over. These are the people blamed for disease, crime, and general moral decay. So everyone learns to perform, even children. They sit stiffly on pews too hard for growing bones, mouth shut, eyes wide, knees pressed together. They're warned that fidgeting is disrespectful, that daydreaming invites sin, that God wants you to listen, even if your stomach is rumbling and your nose is running. After church, the day doesn't lighten. There's no dancing, no card games, no loud laughter. Those things are for Monday through Saturday, barely. On Sunday, you sit, you reflect, you walk slowly, you read the Bible, or you pretend to. Working class families often dread Sundays, not because they dislike God, but because it's the one day they can't distract themselves from how difficult life really is. No work means no wages. No wages means no food tomorrow. But still, they go. Because to skip church is to risk more than disapproval. It's to risk social exile. Your neighbors will notice. Your employer might hear about it. Your children might be turned away from charity school. Faith is a communal ritual, a surveillance system disguised as salvation. You may not believe every word, you may not understand every sermon, but you bow your head, you fold your hands, you nod at the vicar and try not to fall asleep. Because in Victorian Britain, God may be merciful, but society is not. Your feet. You'll get to know them well in Victorian Britain, not because they're pampered or admired, but because they're your main form of transportation, rain or shine, through mud, manure, or a suspicious city puddle. You walk. Everything is a journey. Walking to work, walking to market, walking to church, walking to get water, walking to return a pot you borrowed 3 streets over and prayed didn't break. Your shoes, if you have them, are worn to the shape of your toes. If you don't have shoes, your feet are hardened by years of exposure to cobblestones, frost, and the occasional generous helping of horse droppings. But suppose, just suppose, you need to go farther than your legs are willing to carry you. Well, good luck. Let's talk options. If you're in a city, say London, you might see an omnibus trundling by. Picture a long, heavy wooden carriage packed with passengers, creaking along the streets pulled by horses who look as tired as you feel. You climb aboard, if you can afford the fare, which isn't guaranteed, and immediately regret it. It's crowded. Everyone is either sweating, sneezing, or suspiciously silent. You wedge yourself between 2 strangers and try not to breathe too deeply. The seats are wooden. The ride is bumpy. The speed? Somewhere between snail and still waiting. It's not faster than walking, but it is drier, assuming the roof doesn't leak. Then there's the railway, the so-called miracle of modern life. The iron horse, the great equalizer, except it's not. Rail travel has changed Britain, that's true. Towns are connected. Goods move faster. The middle class gets giddy over timetables. But for you, a railway ticket costs more than your entire week's wages. You might ride a train once or twice in your life, and it will be the highlight of your year. Of course, there are third-class carriages if you're lucky. Wooden benches, no roof, soot in your teeth. But even that's a privilege you have to budget for. Most working people see trains pass by in the distance, not from the window, but from the edge of a field, pausing with a sack of potatoes on their back, watching steam cut across the gray sky. Back in town, there are hackney carriages, the Victorian version of a taxi. You hail one if you're wealthy, injured, or giving birth in a hurry. Everyone else walks. Then there are carts and wagons. But don't get excited. These are for hauling things, goods, coal, vegetables, occasionally bodies. If you manage to hitch a ride on one, you're either very persuasive or you fainted on the roadside. Let's not forget boats. River transport still plays a role. Barges move along canals, sometimes dragging entire families along the towpath. It's scenic if you're not the one pulling the ropes. But let's talk countryside. Living in rural Britain? Transportation gets harder, not easier. Distances stretch. Roads vanish into muddy paths. Your doctor is 5 miles away, which means if someone gets sick, you hope they get better. You walk to church. You walk to school, if there is one. You walk to gather firewood, to help a neighbor, to buy flour. You walk until your knees complain. Then you walk some more. If your family owns a donkey or a cart, you are considered something of a transportation mogul. If not, your shoulders are the cart. And weather? Always a factor. In winter, walking means sloshing through half-frozen ruts. In summer, it's dry dust and sunburns. Spring and autumn? Just mud. Eternal ankle-deep mud. No umbrellas. Just shawls and whatever you can drape over your head. Raincoats are a luxury, and carriages are for the kind of people who don't know what blisters are. Still, you go, because you have to. You don't complain, not out loud. You mutter, you sigh, you adjust the strap digging into your shoulder. You promise yourself that next time you'll leave earlier, pack lighter, or marry someone with a bicycle. But bicycles, mind you, aren't common yet, and the few that exist are mostly for men with time and balance. So for now, it's just you, your legs, and the great cobbled expanse of Britain. You are not fast. You are not comfortable. But you are moving. And in the 1800s, that's the best anyone can hope for. If you've made it this far in Victorian Britain, congratulations. That puts you well ahead of the curve. Statistically, someone in your household has already died. Possibly two. Possibly you, if we're being honest. Because here, disease isn't a visitor, it's a roommate. Let's begin with the classics. Typhoid, cholera, smallpox, tuberculosis. The all-stars of the 19th century's death roster. They don't knock. They don't introduce themselves. They just arrive, uninvited, and move straight in. Typhoid lives in your drinking water. Cholera travels through sewage, of which you are surrounded. Smallpox floats in coughs and lingers in linens. And TB? Well, that one just hangs out in the air, waiting for lungs to open. Catching one of these is not a matter of if, it's when. And the symptoms? Ghastly. Vomiting, diarrhea, fever, coughing up blood. Your skin changes color. Your breath shortens. Your body fails you in real time. But you keep working, because what choice do you have? If you stop, your family doesn't eat. Now suppose you decide to see a doctor, brave or foolish. Doctors in Victorian Britain are variable. Some are trained. Some just own a top hat and a steady voice. They might bleed you. They might give you mercury. They might diagnose you by your smell. And they will almost certainly charge you for the privilege of getting worse. The poor don't usually see doctors. They see herbalists, midwives, or just cross their fingers and hope for the best. You might try mustard plasters, leeches, or warm gin. And if none of those work, you whisper a prayer and prepare a shroud. There are hospitals, but they're not the kind you're picturing. Think more pest house than place of healing. Cramped wards, questionable tools, and the faint, inescapable scent of slow death. If you go to one, you don't always come back. Public health? That's adorable. Sanitation is not yet science, it's superstition. Germ theory is still controversial. Some doctors believe disease floats in bad air or miasma. So when people start dying, the city might respond by burning incense or spraying perfume or asking the chimney sweeps to really give it a go this week. London's water supply? Shared with dead rats and open sewage. In some neighborhoods, people collect drinking water from the same pump used to wash the dead. The Broad Street cholera outbreak in 1854 only stopped because a single doctor, John Snow, decided maybe, just maybe, drinking filth was bad. His reward? Mostly skepticism. Eventually, yes, reform happens. But it's late. Always late. Sewers are built. Streets are cleaned. Vaccines are introduced. But none of it comes fast enough to save the millions who didn't live to see their 40th birthday. Especially not the children. Victorian childhood is a gamble. Infant mortality is high, sometimes more than 1 in 3. If your baby survives teething, they may not survive weaning. If they survive weaning, they may not survive measles or croup or the neighbor's cough. Children die quietly, frequently, and without much fuss. Death is so common that grieving becomes mechanical. You cry, you bury, and then you have another. That's the cycle. That's the coping mechanism. That's family planning. Gravestones aren't just for grandparents. Cemeteries fill with tiny names, short dates, and worn-out mothers who've learned to stop asking why. And when one of your children does survive, it's not because of the system. It's because of luck. Because someone boiled water that day. Because the neighbor shared their soup. Because you managed to keep them warm through the winter without dying of smoke inhalation. Yes, smoke inhalation. Remember, you heat with coal. You cook with coal. You breathe coal. Urban air is thick with soot. Windows stay shut to keep out cold, which means you're slowly marinating in carbon. The inside of your lungs resembles the inside of your chimney. You might not even notice you're sick until your body stops cooperating. A persistent cough becomes blood in your handkerchief. A sore becomes infected. A scrape becomes sepsis, and before you know it, you're the next one laid out in the front room under a thin sheet while the neighbors murmur polite things. But society keeps moving. The bells keep ringing. The factories keep whirring. And your absence, while noted, isn't uncommon. You lived, you worked, you died. Probably before 40. Definitely before retiring. Certainly without health care. This is not melodrama. This is normal life in Victorian Britain. Your body is a battleground. Your breath is borrowed. And your best hope? That history will forget your suffering and remember your survival, assuming you survive. You're starving. Again. You've stretched the bread. You've pawned your boots. The rent's overdue. The children are coughing. And there's nothing left in the pot except soot and a dead hope or two. So you do the unthinkable. You walk to the parish office. It's quiet there. Cold. The clerk doesn't look up. You're not the first to arrive today, or the second, or the fifth. You tell them you need help. You use your best voice, polite, small, apologetic. They say, the workhouse or nothing. And that's when your stomach sinks in a way that hunger never managed. Because everyone in Victorian Britain knows what that means. You've heard the stories. You've seen the shame. You've passed the building with its iron gates and windows that look like they forgot how to open. But you're desperate. So you nod. You're escorted through a gate that closes behind you like the door of a prison. Which is fair, because it is one, just with more scripture and worse food. Inside, you're stripped of your clothes, and your name. You're catalogued, lice-checked, given a number, given a uniform that doesn't fit, and a bed that barely qualifies as furniture. Your dignity is handed back to you in pieces, and none of them are useful. Then comes the worst part. Your family is separated. Your husband, if you have one, goes to the male wing. You're sent to the female ward. Your children, to the juvenile section, where care is loosely defined and rarely enforced. You may see them once a week. You may not see them at all. You cry quietly, but you don't raise your voice, because if you do, you're labeled troublesome. And troublemakers earn punishment, solitary confinement, reduced rations, and endless silence. Meals are efficient, porridge, gruel, maybe bread, always bland, often burnt. The portions are just enough to keep you alive, barely. You eat in rows, no talking. You sit, you chew, you swallow. You do not taste. Conversation is forbidden. Laughter is suspicious. Singing is punishable. Your days are structured like clockwork, with all the warmth and spontaneity of a ticking bomb. Wake, wash, eat, work, pray, sleep. You scrub floors, you peel potatoes, you pick oakum, separating tarred rope fibers until your fingers bleed. Not because it's useful, but because it's deliberately demeaning. That's the point. The workhouse isn't here to help you. It's here to punish you for needing help. Because in Victorian logic, poverty is moral failure. If you're here, it must be your fault. You didn't save. You drank too much. You had too many children. You made poor choices. No one blames the collapsing economy, or unemployment, or sickness. They blame you. And the staff? Not all are cruel. Some are simply numb, burned out, tired of crying children and desperate mothers. Others are worse, tyrants in aprons, taking pleasure in their tiny power, snapping orders like they're breaking twigs. Children fare no better. They're warehoused, fed and forgotten. If they're lucky, they're taught to read. If not, they're put to work in silence, learning that survival comes with strings, and dreams are for people with options. You hear whispers of people dying here, quietly, without ceremony. Their names barely noted, their beds filled within the hour. Sometimes at night, you lie awake wondering if this is it, the end of the line. Not with a bang, but a thin blanket and a spoonful of cold potatoes. Charles Dickens didn't exaggerate. If anything, he softened the edges. He gave workhouse children like Oliver Twist a glimmer of defiance. In real life, that gets you punished, or worse, removed to an asylum. You think of leaving. Everyone does. But where would you go? You came here because there was nothing. Outside these walls is still nothing, just colder. You begin to forget the world outside, the smell of home, the sound of your child laughing freely, a proper meal, your own name, days blur, and yet somehow you keep going. Because beneath all the rules and rot and whispered judgments, there's still a part of you that hopes, that prays you'll get out, that someone will offer work, that the harvest will improve, that the fever will pass. One day you wake to find the matron handing you your clothes back. They still don't fit, but they're yours. You are released. No one celebrates. You step outside into the same cold air you left behind and feel like it belongs to someone else now. You've survived the workhouse, rock bottom with extra gruel, dignity optional, freedom negotiable. But you made it out. And in Victorian Britain, that's as close to a miracle as most people ever get. The day ends the way it began, with discomfort, exhaustion, and the faint scent of coal smoke and boiled cabbage still lingering in your clothes. You want to sleep. You desperately need to sleep. But sleep, like most luxuries in your world, comes with conditions. First, where are you sleeping? If you're lucky, it's on a straw mattress. Well, mattress is generous. It's a sack, a coarse one, stuffed with straw that's been reused, refluffed, and is now more pest than padding. The straw pokes through the seams. It smells faintly of mildew and something else. Best not to investigate. If you're less lucky, you're on the floor. Bare boards, cold, splintered, drafty. Maybe there's a rug. Maybe not. If you're in a workhouse or the back room of a tenement, the rug has been stolen, sold, or eaten by moths. And then there's the cot. You share it with your siblings. One blanket, 3 bodies. No one moves too much unless you want to start a midnight kicking war. Feet in your face, elbows in your back, snoring at odd angles. You lie there, wedged like books on a shelf, trying to find the one position where your arm doesn't fall asleep before you do. The room is not quiet. Someone's coughing. They've been coughing all week. At first you worried. Then you got used to it. Now it's background noise. A lullaby with phlegm. Someone's still working. Your mother, maybe. Mending, darning, boiling something over the fire because the soup wasn't enough. Her movements are soft but constant. The scrape of fabric, the clink of a spoon. You hear her sigh. She doesn't think you notice, but you do. The baby cries. Not loudly. That came earlier. Now it's the whimper cry, worn out from a day of hunger and too much being told, shh. Outside, a horse clip-clops past. A dog barks. Somewhere down the street, a door slams, followed by a muffled argument and the unmistakable crash of something ceramic meeting its end. And it's cold, always cold. There's frost on the window. You can see it from your pillow, forming delicate spider webs in the moonlight. Pretty, until you remember the frost is also inside. The glass is so thin it might as well be decorative. The draft sneaks under the door, through the cracks in the wall, up from the floorboards. Your feet are numb. Your nose is an icicle. The tips of your ears feel like they might snap off if you turn too fast. You pull the blanket higher. There's not enough to go around. Someone grumbles and yanks it back. You compromise. Shoulders exposed, feet semi-covered. No one wins. Sleep would be nice if it would just show up, but it's busy tonight, probably off visiting someone with a feather bed and hot bricks tucked under their sheets. You shift. The straw creaks. You hear a rat. Or was that just your imagination? No, there it is again, skittering, somewhere near the wall. You squeeze your eyes shut and hope it's not feeling bold tonight. Sometimes they run across the floor, sometimes across your feet, one time across your face. You never forgot that. Your stomach growls, loudly, pointlessly. There's no food left. You press your hand over it and curl tighter. Maybe pressure will quiet it. Maybe sleep will override it. You worry. Of course you do. Will work still be there tomorrow? Will the cough get worse? Will your boots hold up another week? What if the rent collector comes early again? Worry is louder than the crying, colder than the wind, more persistent than the frost. You roll over, then back. You count breaths. Someone farts. Quietly. You pretend not to notice. Eventually, your body gives in, not because it's comfortable, but because it's defeated. Your limbs grow heavy. Your breath slows. Your brain sinks under the weight of too many days and not enough rest. And maybe, you dream. Maybe in this dream you have a bed of your own, a real one, with a frame, with legs, with sheets that smell of lavender and sun, not must and skin. Maybe you have a room to yourself, no elbows, no rats. Just silence and the kind of darkness that doesn't feel threatening. Maybe you wake up warm. Maybe your toes don't ache. Maybe the fire never goes out. Maybe. But not tonight. Tonight you sleep the way most ordinary Victorians did. Exhausted, huddled, half frozen, half starved, fully resigned. Because in the 19th century, sleep was not rest. It was an intermission between struggle and more struggle. And still, you dream of space, of breath, of something better, even if it's only in your sleep. In Victorian Britain, they told you something sweet, something stirring. Work hard and you can rise. They printed it in pamphlets. They preached it from pulpits. They taught it in Sunday schools between Bible verses and sewing drills. It sounded nice, uplifting, satisfying. And for most people, it was fiction. Let's be honest. Hard work didn't guarantee success. It guaranteed survival, barely. You worked to eat. You worked to stay indoors. You worked to not die. Social mobility in theory existed. But in practice, if you were born into the working class, you likely stayed there for life. If you were born poor and female, even more so. And if you had the audacity to be poor, female, and sickly, well, that's game over. Sure, there were exceptions. A few people did claw their way up, usually men, often lucky ones. A child might get a scholarship to a grammar school. A street seller might start their own shop. A clever apprentice might become a tradesman, even a master. But for every rags to riches tale told in the newspaper, there were hundreds of thousands still sweeping the same steps they were born next to. And let's talk about those steps. They were steep. Education for the poor was limited. A few hours a day at the charity school, if your parents could spare you. Memorization, morality, and maybe the alphabet. Little more. Most children left school by age 10, sometimes earlier. They didn't learn to analyze or argue. They learned to obey, to keep their heads down, to recite their catechism and know their place. And yet, you were expected to believe in the dream, because belief was cheaper than bread. Charity existed, but it was laced with judgment. You had to look deserving. You had to wear your poverty politely, clean apron, quiet voice, eyes cast down. God help you if you were loud, angry, or pregnant. Then you were not poor, you were troublesome, and troublesome people got nothing. Reform came eventually, slowly, painfully. Missions opened schools. Social reformers lobbied for sanitation. A few brave souls, mostly women, started asking why an empire built on trade couldn't provide shoes for its children. But policy didn't change hearts. and by the time anything resembling support arrived, most people had already broken under the weight of waiting. Meanwhile, the British Empire was booming. Wealth poured into London from India, Africa, the Caribbean. Ships docked with silks, spices, sugar, and tea. And you? You just sewed the uniforms for the soldiers who went abroad to gather it. You stitched buttons onto coats you'd never wear, packed goods you'd never touch, stared into shop windows filled with things that existed only for people you cleaned for. You watched carriages roll by and wondered what it might feel like to own a horse, or a chair that didn't wobble, or a coat that reached your wrists. They said this was a land of opportunity, but only if you had the right accent, the right waistcoat, the right connections. Everyone else was background, the blurred edges of a Dickensian painting. Still, you believed in the self-made man. You had to. It was all you had. You told your children to work hard, behave, be patient. You hoped they'd catch the ladder, even if you couldn't. You whispered the myth like a prayer over porridge. And sometimes, it seemed like it could be real. Like when the neighbor's son became a clerk, or when someone down the road opened a haberdashery, or when the papers ran stories of bootblacks turned businessmen. You didn't know that those were the outliers, the exceptions the system held up to keep you compliant. You didn't know that the ladder was missing half its rungs. You just knew that believing in something felt better than staring into the void of never. And so you did. You ironed your one good dress. You taught your daughter to curtsy. You made your son memorize every hymn. You played your part. You dreamed the dream. And in a world stacked against you, sometimes that belief, however naive, was the only thing keeping you standing. Because the alternative, the truth, that you were born into labor and would die in labor, that the doors would always be closed, that no one was coming to rescue you, that truth was too sharp to carry. So you softened it with hope, and you worked, and you prayed, and you waited, not for success, but for just one step forward. Even if the dream was mostly a lie, it was still yours. You made it. You survived a full Victorian day, and you didn't die of consumption or get trampled by a startled cart horse or contract typhoid from your drinking water. That's a win by 19th century standards. You froze, you scrubbed, you worried. You fed your siblings, patched your boots, picked oakum, and swallowed your pride along with your gruel. You kept going, even when the roof leaked and the soup didn't, even when the cough wouldn't stop, even when the factory bell rang before the sun rose and long after your legs gave out. Your life, by modern standards, is impossibly small, but it is stubborn. You exist in the margins of empire, not the parades, not the portraits, but in the soot and silence. You are the unnoticed engine of everything, and now, finally, you get to rest. No crowded tenement, no shared privy or frostbitten toes, no sermons about morality while your stomach growls. Just you, a soft pillow, and the warmth of knowing you're 3 hours deep into a history video and still, somehow, awake. Or nearly. So breathe. No chimney soot tonight, no lice, no boss with opinions about your work ethic as you collapse from hunger. Just the hum of quiet, the weight of warm blankets, the knowledge that tomorrow you do not have to light the fire at 4 a.m. or haul coal with your bare hands. You are free, for now, from rationed bread, threadbare dignity, and the ever-looming specter of scurvy. You made it through the grime, the grind, the heartbreak, and the historical footnotes. And if your eyes are heavy now, good, let them be. Let the soot settle. Let the silence deepen. Let the worries of 1852 drift away with the fog. Because tonight, you're not a maid or a match girl or a chimney sweep. You're just someone at peace, blanketed by time, safe in the knowledge that your real bed is not made of straw. Sleep well, you poor, overworked Victorian. You've earned it.